Pastor Colin has began a series on unlikely heroes, and today we get to study the journey of Ruth. Ruth's story is not one where giants are conquered or the Red Sea is divided. It's not a story where men are thrown into a furnace or the dead are brought back to life. The scale of Ruth's story is at the level of barley fields and widows, not big palaces in Jerusalem. Ruth was a Moabite woman, a foreigner, ordinary. And her challenges were loss and poverty. And those challenges, they remain today. And God's love story is still so active today. Ruth is known for her noble character and for her courage. And that is actually the definition of a hero. If we turn to Ruth, chapter 1, the book begins when judges ruled Israel. It was a very dark time. People did whatever they wanted to do. There was hostility, there was famine, there was destruction, there was sorrow, there was gloom, there was despair. And Elimelech took his family, his wife Naomi, and his 2 sons, and he moved them to Moab. And Moab was a nation against Israel. So that gives you a glimpse of how desperate Moab and his family were. That gives you a glimpse of how they were trying to run away from all of this gloom and all of this despair. But it only worsened. When they get to Moab, Elimelech dies. Naomi, she buries her husband. And her 2 sons, they marry Moabite women. And within 10 years, Naomi buries her 2 sons. So we're left with 3 widows, Naomi and her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. Their heritage is lost, and they are stripped of everything that they had, and everything that they had was not much. So Naomi begins to make preparations to take her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, back home to her home. But something happens on the road back to Judah. In verse 7, between verse 7 and verse 8, Naomi realizes something. In her hardship, Naomi realizes that Ruth and Orpah are traveling with her to Bethlehem, and this is a place that she believes is not for them. This is a place that she believes is missing something. This is a place that she believes is missing rest. So let's pick up in verse 8, chapter 1, verse 8. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in another husband. Find rest in another home. Find rest in a home." This gives us a glimpse of the despair that is just hovering over these women, this heavy despair. And knowing the despair, we also get a glimpse of what's missing: rest, home, contentment, peace. And these are the things that they hope for. And these are the things that they long for. If we pick up in the middle of verse 9, it says, "Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud." Verse 10, "And said to her, 'We will go back with you to your people.' But Naomi, she urges her daughters to go back to Moab." She urges her daughters to go back to their gods. Let's go to verse 14. In verse 14, "At this, they wept aloud again. And then Orpah, she kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. But Ruth, she clung to her." In this beautiful, heart-wrenching moment, we see more loss, more suffering. We see fear. We see hopelessness. They wept aloud. You know, my eyes, they'll tear up sometimes, and sometimes so much that tears will roll down my cheeks. But I can only think of a few times in my adult life that I have wept aloud. And those are times that I really don't like to think about. Here we have 3 grown women, and they are weeping aloud because their pain is that real, and their agony is that heavy. And Orpah, she lets go, as she was advised to do. And it was a hard goodbye. Verse 15, "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. As Ruth clings to Naomi in this passage, Ruth clings to God. This is her moment where she becomes a believer in God. She said, "Your God will be my God." She placed her faith in the one true God. She abandoned everything that she knew. She let go of all of those other gods for the one true God. It was a reckless abandonment out of radical obedience. She needed something to cling to in her suffering. And God, he's saying, "Cling to me. Cling to me." And what if she didn't? What if she hadn't? Then she wouldn't have been a part of God's story today. And God would have chosen someone else to fulfill his plan. Ruth, she was suffering, but in her suffering, she chose perseverance. She kept going. Let's move on to verse 19. In verse 19, we find a shift from Ruth and her attitude to Naomi and her attitude. Verse 19, "So the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, 'Can this be Naomi?' 'Don't call me Naomi,' she told them. 'Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter.'" The whole town was stirred. Naomi is back after 10 years. In my mind, I'm imagining a reunion. And in my mind, it's a joyful reunion because there's Naomi. There's my friend. I want to run up to her and I want to embrace her. But that's not where she was. She was not ready for that. You could tell probably by the look on her face, and especially by the words out of her mouth. This was not a reunion of joy. This was sorrow. They may have embraced her with hugs, and they may have embraced her with empathy, but I am sure that they proceeded with caution, the way that we do when someone has lost someone that they love. We proceed with caution. We embrace them slowly because we don't really know where they are in their grief. But we find out because she owns her bitterness. Her name, Naomi, it means pleasant, and she doesn't feel pleasant. She doesn't want to be called pleasant. She doesn't feel pleasant. She's bitter, and she owns that, and I love that about her. She's real. She's real with her pain. She's not fluffy. She's not your girl that's going to put on a front and act like everything's okay when it's not, because it's not okay. She's bitter. And all she can see is her hardship. You know, we have people that are optimistic and people that are pessimistic, and then we have people that are realistic. And you may be sitting in your pew, and you could probably say exactly what you are. You could identify what you are. I am optimistic. So if something happens, then I typically think, oh, well, this will probably happen and it's all going to be okay. Or at least it wasn't this bad. I mean, this could have happened, but that didn't happen. So that's great. And that's a good perspective to have, but it also makes me very gullible and it makes me very naive. And Naomi, she is not gullible and she is not naive. Naomi, she's pessimistic. She's skeptical. She doubts. And I'm drawn to her. I am. I'm drawn to the Naomis of this world. Because the Naomis of this world, I have to earn their trust. I have to earn it. And that's a big deal for me. She is constantly evaluating the situation. And she needs proof before she jumps on board. And then she's requesting this name change. She doesn't even want to be called Naomi, which means pleasant. She wants to be called Mara, which means bitter. And thankfully, God did not honor that. Have you noticed that in the book of Ruth? She tells them to call her Mara, but they don't. She's never referred to as Mara. Throughout the entire book of Ruth, she's never referred to as Mara. God didn't honor that. You know, God has changed names in the Bible because God changes names to give someone a new role or a new identity or a new purpose. Abram became Abraham, which meant father of a great multitude. Sarai became Sarah, princess of a great multitude. Jacob becomes Israel after he wrestled with God, meaning one who struggles with God. We have in the New Testament, Simon became Peter, which means the rock. And then Saul becomes Paul. Saul was filled with anger and hostility and hatred, and he becomes Paul, which means humble, because he said, more of you, God, and less of me. Those name changes changed their roles. It changed their purpose. On July 12th, 1992, I sat in a hot tabernacle in Lone Star, Texas at GA camp, and the pastor was preaching a sermon, and I hung on to every word he had to say. And when the invitation came, I jumped to my feet. I didn't contemplate it. I didn't think about it. I didn't look around. I just stood up, and tears were rolling down my face. God called me, and I came. I walked down this red dirt in that hot summer night tabernacle, and I prayed, and I made him the Lord of my life, and my identity, it changed. My purpose, it changed because I became a child of God. God told Naomi in his own way, I'm not going to allow you to call yourself bitter. I have more for you. As a child of God, he had more for her. As a child of God, God says, I'm not going to allow you to call yourself unworthy, not good enough, not pretty enough, not smart enough, unable. I'm not going to allow you to call yourself that because I have more in store for you. My plan is better for you. And thankfully, God did not honor that with Naomi. When I married Curtis, my name changed and my role changed. I became a Mrs. I became a wife. And my role was to serve him, encourage him, support him, and to honor him. And the name change, it was official. It was official in my checking account. My debit card changed. My social security card changed. My driver's license changed. God honored that name change. And thankfully, he did not honor this name change with Naomi because he had more in store for her. In verse 21, Naomi explains her bitterness. She says, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. And there's the irony. Naomi tells them the Lord has brought me home empty. Yet read in the very next verse, verse 22. So Naomi returned from Moab accompanied by Ruth. The Lord did not bring Naomi home empty. The Lord gave Naomi Ruth, just like the Lord gave the Israelites manna, and it was just enough manna. God gave Naomi Ruth, and Ruth was just enough. But Naomi, she couldn't see that because all she could see was the pain. All she could see was the pain that was in front of her. That's all she could see. And if you've read the book of Ruth, you want to say, but just hold on, just wait, because there's hope, there's more. But she doesn't know that. She doesn't see that, right? Meanwhile, God's over here, and he's working on this, and he's over here, and he's doing this, and he's over here doing this, so that all of it will come together for her good and for his glory. But all she sees is her pain. She sees no hope, and she has no hope. And yet, there is hope, because look how verse 22 finishes. They arrive just in time for the barley harvest. God had arranged all of this so that they would have exactly what they need when they needed it. And in the very next chapter, we see that Ruth immediately goes to work in the barley fields. We get a glance at Ruth's character. We find that Ruth gets busy immediately. She's not an optimistic person, and she's not a pessimistic person. She's a realistic person. She sees things as they really are in that moment in time, and she's not going to worry about what was. She's aware of the pain, but she's not going to sit in that boat. She's getting out of that boat, and she's moving forward, because that's who she is. She has a very strong work ethic, and she moves toward. She moves forward. She has direction. She's living in the moment. She goes to find a field to glean. That means that she's like going through the dumpster, right, to get food. To glean is to declare your helplessness and your poverty, and that's what she went to do. She went to go glean in the fields because she was going to survive and provide for her mother-in-law. She had direction. She was persevering. To glean was humiliating, but she did that because she had a strong work ethic. We see more of Ruth's character in this pursuit. Solomon describes a virtuous woman in Proverbs 31. Verse 17, he describes a woman of noble character. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for the task. This is Ruth, a woman of noble character. She sets about her work vigorously, and her arms are strong for the task. And God, he blesses those that work vigorously. Moses was in Jethro's field. David was a shepherd boy tending to sheep. Gideon, he was threshing wheat. Peter, Andrew, James, and John, they were working on their boat. God honors those that work hard, not the lazy. And we may question that. We may not see that. We may question if he honors our work or if he honors our work ethic, but it certainly does not go unnoticed. Work hard and become a leader. Be lazy and never succeed. Proverbs 12:24. Colossians 3:23. Work willingly at whatever you do as if you're working for the Lord and not for men. You cannot steer a car if the gear is in neutral. I'm learning that as a mom of 5 kids, 4 teenagers. It would be nice sometimes to put the gear in neutral and have some smooth gliding, right? It would be nice to be able to just let things be. But God didn't call me to let things be. God called me to work. And that begins in my home, where I want to kick off my shoes. God's called me to do his work that honors him, to do his work that brings glory to his name. If Curtis and I shrug our shoulders and let everything be, then we have no boundaries in our home, and we have no direction. And God calls us to do his work so that we can have direction and we can work towards that. And Ruth was doing that. She was persevering. She was working. She did not shift her gear in neutral. And it's this very perseverance. It's her willingness to keep going, to do the next thing that the Lord had for her to do. It's through that she ends up gleaning in the field of Boaz. And she has no idea who Boaz even is. And then in verse 3, we read the words, as it turned out, she was working in the field of Boaz. As it turned out, who was from the clan of Elimelech. But this was no coincidence. She's gleaning in his field, right? That's humiliating. And he walks out and he sees her immediately. Boaz, his name, it means mighty. He's wealthy. He owns the field. And he says, who's that? And then he says, whose is that? Who does she belong to? He's interested in her. And then he's answered, oh, that's that woman, that Moabite woman. And he already knew. He already knew who she was because Ruth had developed a reputation because of her noble character, because of her work ethic. She had already developed a reputation. So then he tells his men not to lay a hand on her, not to take advantage of her, which could have been very easy to do. She was a foreigner. You can't say, oh, that's so-and-so's daughter. You can't say, oh, that's so-and-so's sister. No, she's a foreigner. She was doing something very risky and something very dangerous, and she was doing it for her mother-in-law. And he cared for her in his field. He told his men not to touch her. He told her that she could go and drink water from the water jars that the men filled, which was backwards, because the women would fill water jars for the men. Foreigners would absolutely fill the water jars for the men. And then he invites her to have a seat at his table. And he feeds her bread and wine and roasted grain. And when she gets up to glean, he tells his men to drop the stalks for her so that she can have an easy job, right? She's not even working for him, but he makes it easy for her. So easy that she picks up enough work that would have been 5 to 10 days worth of work. And imagine bitter Naomi when Ruth comes back. Not empty, full. And this is the part that we're waiting for, because we know that Boaz is related to Elimelech. We know that Boaz could marry Ruth and be her redeemer. He could save her from all of this, which would also save Naomi. But Ruth doesn't know that. She's just working. And Naomi asks, whose field? Who did this? Whose field have you been in? And then there's the moment where she says his name, Boaz. And that's the glimmer of hope for Naomi, where she can see where God has been working here and here and here and here to bring it all together. Because Ruth, she had a redeemer, one that would give her rest. Just like God so loved the world that he sent us a redeemer, one that will give us rest. God is providentially caring for Ruth throughout this story. He's providentially caring for her in the relationships. The relationship between Ruth and Naomi. Ruth clings to Naomi. When Ruth clings to Naomi, Ruth becomes a part of God's story, his beautiful story. And when Ruth clings to Naomi, she's not empty. She has just enough. God's providential care is in the timing. The barley harvest, it began mid-April. The wheat harvest began in mid-June. God placed them there just in time. His providential care is in the location. She didn't just happen to be in the field of Boaz. That was not a coincidence. God placed her in his field. We also see his providential care in Scripture, in the law that was already established. Ruth tells Naomi she's going to glean in a field. Well, what field? They don't own anything. But the law, Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 19 states, when you are harvesting your crops and forget to bring in a bundle of grain from your field, don't go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigners, the orphans, and the widows. Then the Lord your God will bless you in all you do. God's providence and care is for us. It's in the things, and it's in the timing, and then the location. It's in our relationships, right? And it gives us hope in our suffering. And Paul says that we glory in our suffering. Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 4. Not only so, but we also glory in our suffering, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character. And character, hope. In Ruth's story, that hope is the hope of the world, Jesus Christ. If you look in Matthew chapter 1, you see the lineage of Jesus. Ruth is David's great-grandmother, and Jesus is a direct descendant of David. And as a woman unpacking the story of another woman, and I'm looking in Matthew chapter 1 at the lineage of Jesus, I see 41 men listed as his ancestors, but 5 women. And Ruth is one of those women. Ruth has a powerful story to tell, and her story is full of suffering, perseverance, character, and hope. Jesus, the hope of the world. One of my dear friends called me in October, and she asked me if I would send my youngest daughter, Faith, with her daughter to Pine Cove this summer. And she wanted them to go together. And I said, I'll talk to Curtis about that. I'll get back with you. And Curtis and I have never actually sent any of our kids to Pine Cove. And it's not because we wouldn't want to. It's an amazing opportunity. But we have 5 kids. So Pine Cove times 5 is an incredible expense that we can't pay. And I'm sure she probably assumed that. But she said, Katie, I don't think you understand. I would like to pay for Faith to go to camp this summer at Pine Cove. And maybe a little bit of pride in me, too, was just, no, I don't think, that we're okay. We're fine. I'll talk to Curtis about it. We'll figure it out. And she said, no, Katie, God told me to do this. I know he did. I know God told me to do this. And my friend, she lost her youngest child 2.5 years ago. And I do know that God told her to do this. And God is so good with his blessings. He's so, so good. And she's so, so obedient to what he's called her to do. But I also know that she is a mother of 4 children on heaven and on earth. And for her to send 4 children to a Christian camp where their relationship with Jesus is only going to grow, that was a big deal for her to do that, to send 4 kids. And her husband, they have suffered, and they will continue to suffer over the loss of their child, the kind that causes you to weep aloud. That's the kind of suffering, the anguish. But through that, they kept going. They never shifted to neutral. They persevered. They've served our community. In fact, they just released balloons in Colorado. They do it every year that tells the story of their son, and it brings glory to God. And their character, it's only enhanced. Her character quality of compassion, it's only magnified. And she was already a strong woman, but right now, her strength, it's magnified. And the hope, because of the gospel of Jesus Christ, she clings to the hope that she will again see and hold her boy, her son. Just like Ruth, we too have a Redeemer. And in our suffering, we keep moving. We don't shift to neutral. Boaz, he urges Ruth to stay in his field. Don't you know there's danger in the other fields? But Boaz urges Ruth to stay in his field where he can protect and where there's provision. And don't you know that God is urging us to stay in his field? There's danger in other fields, but in his field, he has work for us to do. In his field, there's provision. In his field, there's protection. And he's dropping remnants for us to pick up. And Boaz, he has a seat at his table for Ruth. And God, he has a seat at his table for you. And at his table, there's rest. So the question is, who will you cling to? Let's pray.